Hi, this is Cathy Goodwin, and today we're going to talk about a topic that I hear a lot about from my clients, as well as people. When I speak to a group, someone always comes up and says, okay, I got a bad performance review. I want to write a rebuttal. What should I do? And my question is this something you really want to do? And here are the factors you need to consider. It's very tempting to write a response when you've had a bad review. You want to set the record straight. You want to give your side of the story. But is this going to be the right thing to do? Here's what you have to ask. First, what is a realistic outcome of a rebuttal? Will they make a change in the review? Will it make any difference to your career? And frankly, what do you really, really want? The factors you use to make a decision include the company culture and the job factors. We're only going to look at a limited number of these because of limited time. But what are some job factors that could make a difference in whether you write a rebuttal to your review? First, what is your salary relative to others in your department, in your division? If you've been there a long time and you're at the very top in salary, then you are vulnerable to lower performance reviews because the company doesn't want to keep giving you money and make you even more out of line with the others in your department. This can happen a number of ways. I once had a client who had been invited to take a job at a much lower level than his skills would support because the company merged and his original job was merged out of existence. So there he was, and to be nice, they said, why don't you take a job in this almost clerical capacity at your original salary? Well, he loved it, and he stayed there for years. And finally, they started saying, wait a minute, here's what you should be doing. And I think two things were happening. One is he was bored out of his mind. He was way too smart for that job and should have left a long time ago. And the other thing that was happening was they didn't want to keep paying him a salary that could be done by someone for maybe even a half or a quarter of what he was making. So the company, they have a hard time with that. So they will start looking for factors in your performance. There are other things they could do, but for many, this is the reason that this way they're going to deal with it. So another way this could happen is that you've been there a while, and maybe you've been there a long time in this job, or you were transferred in from another department, and your salary is just high relative to others. Well, then you are vulnerable. They don't want to keep giving you money. So you have to think of these things. And if you're in a situation where you're earning more than others at your level or others in your department, then you might want to think about long-term career goals, not focusing on the review. And then what is the importance of your job to the bottom line? Generally, if you directly affect the bottom line, companies will be nicer to you and will be more respectful in their reviews because they can see the contribution you're making. That doesn't mean you can't take a staff job or a job in something like employee relations or company culture or training or diversity, because those things are less directly contributory to the bottom line. But you need to be aware of where you fit into the company and what value they place and how you can demonstrate your value. And then longevity. If you've been in the same job a long time, you really need to look at what's going on, because as you've been in the job longer, expectations will be higher, and you might be bored and not doing as good a job without even realizing it. So you want to think about that as you stay longer beyond the norm in your company. If most people leave or move to a new job in 3 to 5 years, then you're still there after 6, 7, 8, 10 years, that's a red flag. And you want to think about where you fit and what you're going to do next. I don't recommend you ask your boss directly. Look around, observe the culture, and make some decisions. And that brings us to company culture, which is absolutely critical in your decision to rebut your performance review. In some companies, believe it or not, everybody gets a bad performance review, especially when they're new. It doesn't make sense to a lot of people. It's counterproductive in many ways. But if that's the culture, you kind of have to live with it. In other cultures, you're expected to suck it up. That's the term they use. I read about someone who had been in the military as an officer and got a low score on a certain quality on her efficiency report, which is a really big deal for an Army officer. But in that culture, there was no way she could rebut or speak up without causing a lot of problems, because in her division and her branch and her surroundings, the The byword was, suck it up. If that's the culture and you start to protest, it will actually go against you. And it might even be a test to see what you can suck up. And then there are the cultures of don't make waves. That's another culture that's very common. And if that is the culture, then again, there's not much you can do. If you start to argue about your performance review, you'll be seen as making waves. And that's a bigger sin than anything you could be doing in your performance. So those are things to consider. It doesn't mean you stay with the company and do nothing, but it certainly means that you are aware of these factors before you spend the time, energy, and sometimes money writing a review or a response to review. Now, there are exceptions. There are serious accusations that can be made against you that call for an attorney. I am not an attorney, but I would encourage you to see these as red flags. If you have a false accusation against you and it's taken seriously, they say you were late to meetings 5 times and you were never late to a meeting, and you can document because the minutes show who was on time and who was late. Or if they say, we have our customers review our representatives and you got low reviews, and you have your reviews and they all show high. Or they say, we have complaints against you, but you've never heard of those complaints up till now. Those are all things that raise red flags, and you should talk to an attorney. There may be nothing the attorney can do, but in my non-legal opinion, it would be worth a visit. And of course, it may sound bizarre to say criminal charges, but I did have a client who mentioned that in a previous job, she had been accused of embezzlement. And I was shocked out of my mind. I said, what? Why didn't you get a lawyer? And she said, well, we couldn't afford one or whatever. And it was not really relevant to what we were talking about at the time. So I dropped it. But I will tell you, if you are accused of anything that is criminal, whether it's embezzlement or violating company secrets, or if you're asked to do anything that is not legal, such as forge a document or report inaccurate results, you absolutely must go to a lawyer, even if it means losing your job. It's better to lose a job than to end up in prison. And things happen. So be very careful. If that happens, you just don't waste any time. Do what you have to do to pay for a lawyer. That's legal, of course. Borrow, go without food for a week, whatever. I'm exaggerating, but whatever you need to do, pay a lawyer to talk to you. And that's why you always want to keep a reserve fund for emergencies. And this would definitely count as an emergency. Other legal issues that come up include things like discrimination. So let's say you're on the phone with someone and they mention something about age, and they say something about at your age you can't expect much from the company. Make a note. It's called contemporaneous notes. I don't know the legal status. I'm not a lawyer, but keep notes. If you think you've got a case, look it up and maybe talk to a lawyer about that. Discrimination cases are notoriously hard to prove, especially age discrimination. But if you've gotten a lot of false accusations on a performance report, then the discrimination case may be an easier sell to the court system or to get a settlement. Again, not a lawyer. This is based on a lot of experience. So talk to a lawyer about this. And the same with breach of contract. You may have an agreement that they would provide you with certain things to do your job, and now they're not, and they still expect you to do the job. And now they're coming down on you. Well, if you're fairly new, it's an issue. But I would say at this point, definitely consider legal advice. If you can document that you had a contract, and what counts as a contract can vary. Sometimes your job description in a manual may or may not. I've heard it does not count as a contract, but I've also heard that it might. So don't guess. Go and get some help from an employment lawyer, not the lawyer down the street who does wills and trusts, but from someone who really knows employment. This is not legal advice. I am not a lawyer, but this is really what I would do, what I would advise my friends and family to do if they were in the situation. Now, otherwise, outside of all these other factors, look at your long-term goals. What do you really want to do? When I work with the clients, that's the first thing I ask. And for some people, it's, well, I really want to beat this review. Yeah, but one of the things that's going to happen, and I have to tell you, most people don't want to hear this. I did not want to hear it when I had jobs. Clients never want to hear this. But one day, after you've left your job, maybe a week, maybe a month, you will have forgotten this, and your performance review will be a distant memory. You'll be involved in doing something else. The only time it might come up is if you are looking for another job and you have to be concerned about a reference. But a lot of times that's not an issue. Your performance reviews usually are not released to others, so I would not worry about it. Well, I shouldn't say that. In most cases, I would not worry about it. I would certainly focus on moving forward. A lot of times someone says, I got a bad review, but it's really time to say goodbye. If you've been in a dead-end job for 10 years, 15 years, and I've had clients who have been there, hey, don't waste your time on the review. It's time to move on. It's past time. So get moving. Or if you really hate the job and you want to be doing something else, then use the job. Use the time you have to move to an ideal future. Don't waste the time dealing with this performance review. And identify realistic outcomes, as we said at the very beginning. What is likely to happen after you write your rebuttal, after you argue, after you put in the energy? Will you have a meaningful difference in outcome? If the answer is yes, and you think it will, then yes, by all means. If the answer is no, then hey, you've got other things to do. Always keep an eye on the job market, no matter how secure your job is, and always keep an eye on self-employment options. I am telling all my clients, when you turn 40, and that's an arbitrary number, but it could be 40, 45, 50, start thinking, what would I do if I got laid off? Because the older you get, the harder it is, realistically. Now, I do know people who have made amazing job changes at 50 and 60. They're not usual, they're the exception, but they do happen. But the odds are it's going to be tricky to make a change. And you may not want to make a change at that stage. You may want to do something else. So start thinking about what you can do on a self-employment level. If you want to get more information, you can go to my site, midlifecareerstrategy.com. And I've listed a couple of specific resources for you. One is, the first one, PRFR, that's my performance review consultation, where we will spend 60 to 90 minutes going over your performance review, discussing your options, deciding what to say in a rebuttal, if anything, and really how this will fit into your long-term career. Secondly, I have a series of recordings relating to a career pivot or business pivot. These are from a dozen successful people who started out generally in corporate life, and how they made a move to self-employment, and what are some of the transitions within self-employment. They will really get your juices flowing, get you inspired. They've had careers as therapists. One guy was actually a detective in Southern California, and then he became a self-employed financial planner, and then a marketing consultant. There was a woman who was a scientist, and she became a self-employed life coach and then business coach. All kinds of things you can do. So instead of focusing on the performance review, think about what you want your life to look like in 5 or 10 years. Then decide what you need to do to get there and start moving. And I'm always here to help. I have found a lot of times when people start to talk to their families about their jobs, it can affect your relationship with your family. So I would encourage you to think about getting a consultant or coach, because you get an objective perspective, you have someone who understands where you're coming from, and you'll maintain your good relationships with your family and friends. So thank you so much for joining me today, and I look forward to seeing you again on a future video, or perhaps a one-to-one call for consultation. Thank you so much. Have a great rest of the day.